Howdy, everyone. Let me give you some details here on cables in general. Not specifically these cables, but just cable handling and usage in general. So, like I had said, these cables. Let's see if I can get a little bit of a more clutter-free background here. So these cables, they have the swivel feature, which is this right here. You can see that it swivels inside this fitting. This is, I believe, this might be stainless, I'm not sure, but this is aluminum, and this fits inside here, and then it's crimped to hold it in place, but it is able to flex around 360 degrees. Like I said, these are 8 degrees in every direction. They have these rubber boots, and I've slid this rubber boot down out of the way so you can see what's going on in here. So when you're handling these things, you want to make sure that you don't jam this like into a corner or something when you're feeding your line through the airplane. You don't want to have this wedged such that it's cocked one way or another, and then you don't want to apply a lot of force to the cable when this is jammed, because now you've got a pretty good lever and it will open up this swage in here, this crimping. You know, you can imagine if I put my hand on this and I just cranked it, I could probably pop this out of here because this is just aluminum. So you want to be very careful that you don't inadvertently put a lot of twist or a lot of pull on this swivel, because you'll jack it inside of here and then you'll be screwed. The other thing is, if you have the bulkhead fitting like you see here, the nuts, the washers are fine, but the nuts are a little bit difficult to get over this part here with the rubber boot on. So just slide the rubber boot down onto this piece of metal, and the nuts will go over all of this really nice, and it will clear this really nice. With the boot over top of here, the nuts are very difficult to get on and off. You also want this rubber boot out of the way so you can see, if you look down the line in this fashion here, you want to be able to see what kind of a gap you have between this metal tube that the rubber seal is sitting on, this metal tube, and this swaged part. Because you can see when you move it around, you want to have some kind of a gap. When you have this installed, or if you have it connected to your control, and you're trying to figure out if you're making a bracket from scratch or if you have a store-bought bracket, when you have this installed and everything is attached and your rod end is attached and you've got your bulkhead attached, when you run, for instance, this lever arm here, when you run this through its full range of motion, you want to look down inside here and make sure that nothing is binding. You don't want this to be completely bound up against the inside of this aluminum. So again, when you've got it all together, kind of like I showed you on the other side with this cable, when I run my mixture through its entire range of motion, I had the rubber piece off. I had the rubber piece up out of the way. I was looking down into where these meet, and just make sure as I'm moving the lever that swivel can swivel and it doesn't get bound up inside here. So you can see this is my homemade bracket. I've now got the rubber boot in place. These nuts are tight. I've got this mounted with some custom spacers, and I've got it safety wired, and my connection onto the mixture arm is complete and cotter keyed and all that stuff. So this cable for the most part is done. I've got some work to do on the other end inside the cockpit, and I'll get to that sometime later. So now I've moved on to the throttle cable, which is the one hanging here. It's got to attach to this arm. Like I said, I'm not happy with this arm. It would be better if it was straight. I know that I could probably buy one. I have a feeling it's going to be stupid expensive, so I'm kind of planning on not buying a new arm and maybe just making some standoffs or something like that. But I got to figure this out. I got to figure out how to run this, how to make a mount for it and things like that. So I guess that's about it for now. I'm going to try to get some stuff figured out, and I'll talk to you guys later. Howdy, everyone. Well, I'm making some progress on these control cables, and you can see here that I've got my mixture cable and my throttle cable are now in place permanently, flight ready, at least on the engine side. So again, I've already talked about the mixture control. This is the mixer control here, and of course the cable. I've already talked about the bracket that I had made and these couple of standoffs. The boots, the rubber boots, are now in place, and I've got the appropriate washers. I've got the appropriate washers in here for the rod end, and again, you want to make sure that nothing is binding. You want to work the control arm through its full travel and make sure throughout the entire range of travel that there is no binding. Of course, these rod ends, they get screwed onto the push-pull cable, and then they get a jam nut put on them. Make sure when you do that, when you have the rod end tight and you have the jam nut tight, again, work the arm through its full range of motion, and make sure that the ball, the rod end, does not have a set that's rotated one extreme or the other. Because what was happening with this one, for whatever reason, I would set it so that the rod end was nice and straight and that it basically had the same amount of travel to either side. When I would work the arm like all the way up, the ball would rotate, and then when I'd take it back the other way, it would rotate back. So I had to keep loosening the jam nut and then rotating the rod end in the opposite direction and then tighten it in that orientation with it slightly rotated. And then when I would run the arm through its full range of motion, the ball would stay nice and straight. It wouldn't come up and cock. So those are the types of things just to keep in mind. Again, you don't want anything binding. You don't want anything tight. If you get your cables with the swivel at the end, you want to make sure that, again, through its full range of motion, it doesn't bind down here in the swivel. I now have my throttle cable connected, and it's the same way. Custom-made bracket, a couple of spacers. You can see it's a fairly straight shot right to the control arm. Not happy with the control arm. This is what came with the engine. I think it would have been nicer if it didn't have this kick in it, if it just came straight down. That would have made making this bracket and getting this set up easier. But it's what I had, and I got it to work, so it's not the end of the world. Again, this is a spacer that I had to use to get the push-pull cable in alignment without any kind of binding. Again, appropriate washers around the rod end so that you get full travel on the rod end. And again, swing everything through its full arc of motion. Make sure nothing is binding. Make sure everything stays nice and loose from a binding standpoint. I did notice that one of my rod ends, the ball was loose. The ball inside the rod end had some play, so I replaced it with a brand new one. That's the kind of play that you do not want. Obviously, you want freedom of motion, but you don't want slop. So I had to replace the ball end. So these are all done. Everything is tight. Everything is cotter pinned. I got my safety wire on my bolts. And I've got my penetrations are now finished. There's one there. That one is tight. And there's one here. That one is also tight. So in parallel with setting up the cables down here, I've also been trying to get my brackets figured out for inside the cockpit. Since I'm using a throttle quadrant, this is all being figured out kind of custom on the fly. And I'm just using a simple angle bracket. These are the clip ends of the cables, so they just slide down into these machined grooves. And the bracket the bracket itself holds them in place. I can get a better shot of that. You can see, hopefully, how they'll slip down in those notches that I machined into the angle bracket. So this is my mixture. Let me see if I can switch hands here. So this one here is mixture, this one is throttle, and then this groove here that goes all the way down, the really long groove, that's going to be the cable for the prop control. And this is all still a work in progress. Ultimately, I'm going to bolt this bracket. The bracket is going to get bolted to this angle piece here where the C-clamp is. And then I'm also going to bolt another piece of angle coming off of this one. It's going to come off the side here and up. And that's going to hold the cover that goes across here. That cover picks up these mounting bolts and it runs across. It's going to pick up that bracket. The bracket's going to bolt to that here, and then it bolts to the forward bulkhead up here as well. So that's where I am so far. The cable lengths seem to be pretty good. The throw for the cables seem to be really good, and it's just a matter of getting it figured out and getting it put in. So still plugging away on cables. The last cable, like I said, is the control cable for the propeller, and that's going to come through this penetration here, and then it comes out of there. It's probably going to loop out a little bit and come back in, and it's going to plug into that bracket that I had showed earlier. I took it out, but that bracket was in here somewhere, and then it plugs into the control arm for the propeller governor. That bracket is also not working for my setup, so I'm going to make a custom bracket, one more custom bracket for the propeller, and I should be all set. But I can't do that today. I'm going to start on that bracket soon, but I can't work on that today. So what I'm going to do next in the short term is probably work on that last bracket for the throttle quadrant and try to get my cover plate put on. Make sure that I cotter pin the clevis pins, put all that together. Then I could just have the control cable hanging out here loose. I'll get that bracket made, and then I'll be able to tie that together. And then I can come back and make my other 1/4 inch or 3/16 line for my oil pressure, or what is that? No, my fuel pressure. I can do that. And then maybe it'll be time to put this skin on. Not sure, not there quite yet. Still got to get these cables finished up. But so that's it for now. That's where I am. That's where I will be going in the short term. And I'll talk to you guys later.